Every single year, there is always a handful of divisions that drastically improve from the past season. However, there's also times where certain divisions go from being really good to not being very good. So in today's video, I want to look at the 8 divisions in the NFL and rank them from worst to best. If you guys do go on to enjoy, hit the like and subscribe button. Let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with the AFC South. Now, I do want to put a bit of a preface out there that for the most part, a lot of these are very interchangeable, especially the bottom half of this list. However, this is just a specific list that I have. If you disagree, you can tell me in the comments. As I mentioned, at number 8, the AFC South. The AFC South is a division with a lot of rebuilding teams, but also a couple of teams that are pretty darn good. The AFC South consists of the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Tennessee Titans, and I kind of broke it down like this. I think there's one rebuilding team, that being the Tennessee Titans. I think there's 2 teams that are currently building towards becoming contenders in the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Indianapolis Colts. And then I think the Houston Texans are like the only true playoff contender. Now, yes, you could convince me that the Jacksonville Jaguars might be contenders. Same things with the Indianapolis Colts. But I think as I look at it right now, the Houston Texans are the only team that I feel terribly confident in. Just because with Indianapolis, I don't know what I'm getting from the quarterback, and then from Jacksonville, I just don't think they're as talented as a team like Houston. With that said, this is a very young division. It's a drastically improved division from last year. I mean, let's be honest, the Colts were not very good last year, the Jaguars were not good, and definitely not the Tennessee Titans. This year, however, feels like a lot of these teams actually have an improved direction. Tennessee has their franchise quarterback. I expect them to be on the rise the next couple years. Jacksonville also just found a absolute stud receiver / corner that'll fix a lot of their biggest issues. They got a new head coach also there, so it does kind of feel like that roster's heading in the right direction as well. For Indianapolis, they've had competitive rosters the past couple years, but the quarterback position has kind of held them back. Overall, it's a pretty darn complete roster that's just missing a quarterback. So this is a make or break year for Anthony Richardson. If Anthony Richardson can go out there and perform at a high level, I think the Colts will benefit greatly from it. But if he sucks next year, they'll probably move on to a different guy. And then, of course, Houston, they're my only playoff contender. I don't think they're championship contenders quite yet, but I do think they're pretty darn close to getting there. Let's go and move on to my number 7 division in the NFL, and that is also going to be another South division, this one, the NFC South. The NFC South consists of the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers, the New Orleans Saints, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And similar to the AFC South, I broke it down like this. I think there's one rebuilding team, one team that is building, and 2 playoff contending teams. The rebuilding team is obviously the New Orleans Saints. Once they got rid of Derek Carr and brought in Tyler Shough, it kind of felt like this was a team that sort of hit the reset button, and I think it was about dang time. Overall, the roster isn't terribly bad. I don't think this rebuild will take particularly long. It just kind of comes down to how good is Tyler Shough going to be in his rookie year. And if he performs at a high level, then I think the Saints could be a somewhat competitive rebuilding team that within the next 2 years can maybe get back into playoff contention. The one building team for me was the Carolina Panthers. The past 2-3 years has been them in the rebuilding process. This offseason, they were very aggressive to try and finally kind of finish up their rebuild. I still feel like they have another 1 to maybe 2 seasons before they become contenders. Hence why I kind of have them in the building section. They're not going to be bad enough to have a top 5 pick, but they're also not going to be good enough to become serious playoff contenders. And then, of course, the 2 actual playoff contenders are the Buccaneers and the Falcons. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been a super competitive team the past couple years, haven't been able to quite get over the hump, and I have a feeling it might be similar again this year where they'll probably make the playoffs, but I just have a hard time seeing them make that deep playoff run. But they'll still be very competitive and have some very close matchups late into the season. And then for Atlanta, if Michael Penix Jr. really does work out, they have a pretty darn good roster. So I feel like if Penix can just become the guy we think he can be, then I do look at that Falcons team and say that they could be a very competitive unit that does potentially make a deeper playoff run. In terms of the overall outlook of this division, it looks pretty bright. You have 3 young quarterbacks in Penix, Bryce, and now Tyler Shough, not to mention a relatively youngish quarterback in Baker Mayfield, to go along with 4 teams that are pretty young and building into the right direction. You also have a number of young head coaches here too. Raheem Morris is only in his 2nd year with the Falcons. Dave Canales, his 2nd year with the Panthers. Of course, Kellen Moore is a rookie head coach now for the Saints. The only coach that isn't is the Buccaneers coach, but I wouldn't be shocked if in the next couple years they do get a new head coach. Not that he's a bad coach, I just think that maybe there's some potential upgrades out there. But in general, really solid division. It just doesn't quite match up to the lengths of some of these other divisions out there. Let's move on to number 6. It is going to be the AFC East. Again, I want to reiterate that every team from like 5 to 8 you could convince me to put them in any specific order. The thing about the AFC East is none of these teams are like necessarily rebuilding. The only one that kind of is rebuilding is the Patriots, but I think they really expedited their rebuilding process so quickly this offseason that I ended up kind of putting them in the building process. I think there's two builders and I think there's two somewhat contenders. The somewhat contenders, of course, are the Buffalo Bills, and I guess I'll throw the Miami Dolphins in there. Dolphins aren't rebuilding. They're actively trying to win a championship, but at the same time, it's pretty clear they're pretty far away from that. They're one of the few examples of a team that's in the contending category, but I don't think they're really close to being contenders. Whereas for Buffalo, they're by far and away the best team that I've talked about so far in this video. They're championship contenders. They have everything that they could possibly need to go after a big-time championship. MVP quarterback, awesome defense, good head coach, great offensive pieces around Josh Allen. Like, that's the one true contender in this division. And when I go back to the builders, of course, the Patriots, as I mentioned, they kind of were able to fast the rebuild process the past 2 years. Like last year, it was getting Drake May, getting a number of other pieces. This year, it was having a strong free agency class, having a solid draft too. And even though I still think they need at least one more year of quote unquote rebuilding or retooling, I still feel like they're kind of now in the process of building, or at least they're entering the building process. Some people will say the Patriots are playoff contenders. I'm not quite yet there with them. I do love their head coach. I do love their quarterback. I still think they need at least one more year of adding more talent to both the offensive line and to the defensive line. But by 2026, I think this team will probably be in my contenders category. And then there's the New York Jets, a team that last year would have, I guess, hypothetically been in my contenders category because they were a bit of a older roster, ready to go all in. But then this offseason, they got rid of Rodgers. They got rid of Devontae Adams. They're now focusing in on this new kind of youth movement with Justin Fields as their quarterback. You bring in a new head coach in Aaron Glenn, who I'm a big fan of. I do think the Jets are heading in the right direction. It's just as of right now, they're not quite yet in that contender spot. Granted, I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to make a push because I think if Justin Fields works out, it's a pretty good Jets roster. It's just, it needs probably one more year of building before they actually become like legit playoff contenders. Plus, we also have to just kind of see what Justin Fields looks like out there. So in general, this is kind of an up and down division. The Bills are obviously going to be contenders for the foreseeable future, but then you look at the Dolphins and their future's not very bright. New England's future is very bright, and then the Jets' future is still kind of up in the air. Let's move on to number 5, the AFC North. If you had asked me this question last year, I probably would have said the AFC North were like in the top 3. However, this offseason hasn't been particularly kind to a number of these teams so far. Now, when I did this list, I did take into account that at some point, Pittsburgh will have either one of Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins. I feel like one of those two quarterbacks will be a Pittsburgh Steeler by the beginning of the season. But honestly, it doesn't really change my mind on the Steelers regardless of who is the quarterback, whether it is Rodgers, Kirk, or Mason Rudolph. So for this division, I have it listed as one team that is currently rebuilding and 3 teams that are actively trying to contend for playoff spots. The one team that is rebuilding is the Cleveland Browns. The Browns feel like they're in a consistent state of constantly trying to rebuild. It's been like this for a while at this point, and they had a couple good years lately, but I gotta be honest with you, I'm not too high on the Browns. You bring in 2 young quarterbacks, you're kind of retooling the roster in a lot of ways. It's one of the weird teams where they're kind of an older roster with a lot of older pieces, but they're also not really anywhere close to becoming contenders. Now, I do think the Browns will be better this upcoming season than what they were last year, but just because I think they'll be better doesn't mean that I think they'll be championship contenders. I think they're pretty close to like a 6-7 win team next year and, 1 or 2 years away from being actual contenders. In terms of the 3 teams that are actively contending for playoff spots, it's of course the Bengals, Steelers, and Ravens. Ravens are similar to the Bills. They're actively going for a Super Bowl. They're stacked with talent. Everything you could possibly want, they have. So they'll be probably potential Super Bowl champions this year. We'll have to wait and see. Cincinnati's trying to get there, but man, they have so many issues with contracts, with older players, and so on and so forth. It's a weird roster because they have so much firepower on offense, but their offensive line isn't very strong. And then defensively, there's just a number of questions they have to answer. So they're going to be trying to make the playoffs, and it's simply just going to be off the back of Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. And then for Pittsburgh, regardless of who the quarterback is, I think this team will just be solid yet again. Like they'll be an 8 to 11 win team. Probably make the playoffs or at least come close to making the playoffs. And kind of like the past few years, they'll probably be first round exits, which I know Steelers fans are probably not really fond of. If I was a Steelers fan, by the way, I would be wanting this team to dismantle everything, trade everything away, and just fully rebuild because this team is kind of just going nowhere right now. But in general, the outlook of this division is honestly kind of concerning in some ways. There's some really good players in this division like Lamar, Burrow, Chase, Denzel Ward, TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, like so many good players. But these teams just kind of feel like they're up in the air outside of like the Baltimore Ravens. Like the Ravens will be contending for championships this year, but Cincinnati and Pittsburgh are just in such weird spots. And Cleveland is also in a weird spot where they have a team that's ready to go, but they haven't found that quarterback and they just have so many other issues on their roster. With that said, that is my 5 through 8. And again, I feel like these are very interchangeable. So if you have an issue with it, I can understand your perspective. But let's enter into the top 4. At number 4, I have the NFC West. To me, once you get to the top 4, these are actually like the really solid or to great divisions in the NFL. Everybody below them is okay, but not great, especially the bottom 2. But the NFC West to me is a really stacked and honestly kind of an underrated division. I look at this division and I think there's 4 contenders, one of them being a championship and 3 being playoff contenders. The 3 playoff contenders to me are the Cardinals, are the Niners, and are the Seahawks. For me, the Cardinals are such an underrated team. I have a really strong feeling that the Cardinals will be a lot better next year. They have everything you could possibly ask for. Defensively, they're stacked with talent. If they can get Will Johnson to be healthy and play at a high level, then they have their quarterback 1. You put up Walter Nolan, you add in Josh Sweat, Dalvin Tomlinson, Calais Campbell to what was already a defense that has some decent pieces in the secondary. And offensively speaking, I'm not in love with their offensive line, but I think it's solid enough. You got a good ground game with James Conner. You have some great receivers. Hopefully Marvin Harrison Jr. can get going. And if Kyler can stay healthy, they'll be definitely contending for a playoff spot. San Francisco is a weird one because they're clearly trying to go all in this year, but they're really struggling with their finances and just players kind of regressing in some ways. This offseason, I feel like they got rid of some of the fat, but they also lost a lot of pieces that I would have preferred for them to have kept. I do feel like maybe the Niners are getting a little bit disrespected, especially when you look at the Niners schedule. It's, from what I remember, is a pretty easy schedule. So San Francisco will probably be right in the thick of things, but I don't think they're necessarily championship contenders right now. And then there's Seattle, a team that has just gone through a bunch of changes this offseason. I love a lot of things about Seattle. I just think I need to see the proof in the pudding with Sam Darnold. Like, I need to see him have a consistently great season where he doesn't go up and down. Like, that's really what I want to see from Sam. And if I do get that, then maybe Seattle can push their way into championship contenders, especially if that defense is fantastic. But I think they'll be like an 11 to 12 win team next year that gets into the playoffs, maybe makes a bit of a deep playoff run, but I don't think they're championship contenders quite yet. For me, the only true championship contender is the Rams. Now, that is subject to change if the Niners or Seahawks or hell, even the Cardinals just come out the gate smoking hot. They could potentially move up into that category, but for now, I'm going to stick with the LA Rams. They really have everything, like a solid as hell offense with a great offensive mind. You bring in Devontae Adams to pair up with Puka Nacua. You add a tight end. Matthew Stafford has won a championship. He's been there, knows how to get there. And defensively speaking, it's just a really solid unit with a really nice front 7. Do worry about the linebackers a little bit and maybe like they're missing a cornerback 1. But outside of that, like I just think the Rams are just super solid and just ready to go. Moving to number 3, I have the NFC East. I think there's one team that is currently building towards becoming a contender and 3 teams that are actual contenders. Now, that one building team is obviously the New York Giants. Their schedule is just brutal this year. I don't think they're quite yet there, in part because of their schedule, but outside of the quarterback room, I feel really nice about this team. The offensive line could use some work, but I think there's some good weapons on the outside with Slayton and Neighbors and Tyrone Tracy and now Cam Scatterbo. And then defensively speaking, I thought they've done a really solid job. Their secondary looks big time improved. If Deontay Banks plays well, that'll help them a ton. Your front 7 is super dominant now with Abdul Carter and Kayvon and Dexter and Burns. Like, it's just super solid. The only thing that kind of holds me back from calling them contenders is number 1, their schedule, but number 2, just the question marks with the quarterbacks and honestly the question marks with who will be the head coach by week 12. Like, those are just questions we have to answer right now. With that said, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Like, I think this team will be competitive with a lot of teams. They're not going to be a top 5 pick next year. They're just way too talented to be that bad. However, you got to put it out there on the field. Like, the quarterback has to play better. They got to find some way to upset some teams. So right now they're building, but I think by next year, if Dart definitely works out, they could become like playoff contenders. And as I said, I think there's 3 contending teams. I think there's one team that is just really a playoff contender, but 2 teams that could potentially push for a championship. Obviously, those teams, the Dallas Cowboys are the playoff contender. I think they're a really solid team that has addressed some of their biggest issues in the offseason. With that said, there's still a lot of unprovenness with this offensive line. It's super young and super developmental right now. And you add in a George Pickens, you add in a CD Lamb. Still feel like the running back group is a little bit weak, but I guess you could say it might be better from last year's, especially because there's just more options back there. I still think they're missing that true RB1 though. And then defensively speaking, there's a lot of question marks with the overall health of the secondary. Now, I do want to say the Cowboys have been in potential negotiations for Jalen Ramsey. If that does happen, that would be pretty sweet. But I do worry a little bit about their front four, primarily the interior. It's been kind of a weak spot for the Cowboys the past couple years. Mozzie has not worked out. If Mozzie does work out, then okay, the Cowboys might move up a little bit. With that said, it's the Dallas Cowboys. I think they're going to be in the playoffs, but I have a hard time seeing them actually make a deep playoff run right now. With that said, if they make the playoffs, it's a step up from where they were last year. The two championship contenders to me are, of course, the Eagles, who are coming off a Super Bowl run. Pretty self-explanatory, and the Washington Commanders, who made the NFC Championship game from last year. Now, I'll say this about the Commanders. I do think they relatively overperformed their talent from last year. Like, I think their talent was not equal to an NFC Championship game. Kind of feel like in some ways, Jaden Daniels was kind of, I don't want to say carrying, but definitely kind of, bodying this roster to that spot. So I do expect some level of regression, but at the same time, I feel like if the Commanders make the playoffs, they're just one of those teams that nobody wants to face, and that they could just find a way to beat some teams they probably should lose to and end up making that championship appearance. Like, I just wouldn't be surprised. I just think that highly of Jaden Daniels, and I think that highly of Dan Quinn. So because of that, I'll throw them in the championship contender spot, but you can also kind of put me in my place and just call them playoff contenders. Regardless, they're still a great team, and to me, the NFC East, in terms of their outlook, looks pretty solid. The Cowboys kind of feel like they figured things out. Looks like they're kind of heading into a better direction. The Giants should be better from last year. I think their future is looking pretty bright. Philly is Philly. They're probably going to win another championship within the next 3 years. And then Washington's future is unbelievably bright with Jaden Daniels. But let's go ahead and move over to number 2, the AFC West. This is one of these divisions that last year, I feel like there was really no expectations, or at least not expectations of becoming a great division. But man, this offseason, every single one of these teams outside of the Chiefs has just drastically improved. So for this division, I said there's one team that's currently building and 3 teams that are actual contenders. With that said, you could actually talk me into all 4 of these teams being contenders. It's just that I think the one team, that being the Raiders, are still like a year away until they're actual contenders. But with that said, the Raiders do have a lot of talent. You bring in a nice head coach, a new quarterback in Geno Smith, who's awesome. You add in an Ashton Genty behind what should be a decent offensive line to go along with the defense that is also much improved. To me, though, the Raiders do have some fundamental flaws they have to look to address. For starters, I think they need like one more big-time receiver. They also could use some secondary help big time. But I do think their general talent can push them to become a very competitive team that probably by next year will be in the playoffs. The 3 contenders are the Chargers, Chiefs, and Broncos. I have them listed as 1 playoff contender and 2 championship contenders. I think the Chargers are the playoff contenders, and low-key, I think the Broncos are maybe dark horse championship contenders. So we'll start off with the Chargers. Really talented team. Last year, they made the playoffs, kind of to the surprise of a lot of people, including myself. My bad, Chargers fans. I've seen the light nowadays. Chargers, I think, are definitely going to probably be in the playoffs again next year. They've gotten better this offseason. Some new running backs, some additions to the offensive line. Defensively, it looks pretty similar, but there's some new faces there too. It's a great unit with just so much upside to be a really talented team for the foreseeable future. Then there's the Broncos. I think the Broncos are like dark horse championship contenders. Now, you can talk me down into just saying they're playoff contenders, but that Denver Broncos defense is just filthy. And I think they have a legit shot to just shut out a lot of teams. Like, they're going to go up against certain teams, and these teams are going to have a very difficult time just even moving the ball, because that defense is ridiculously talented from the secondary to the front 7 to everything. That Broncos defense has it. They have pass rushers. They have opportunistic cornerbacks. Jahdae Barron was such a great pickup. Talanoa Hufanga, Drake Greenlaw, like just so many fun pieces to add to this defense. And offensively speaking, you have Sean Payton. You're now with year 2 Bo Nix, who's going to be more experienced. Yes, they maybe are missing like one go-to weapon on offense, but you add a nice tight end. Your offensive line is super solid. Like, it's just such a well-rounded team. The only thing for me that holds me back on Denver is just that I wonder if there is a level of a ceiling with Bo Nix that maybe could hurt them. But at the same time, we've seen freaking Jimmy Garoppolo make it to the Super Bowl. So Bo Nix is better than Jimmy. That's very easy to say. And then, of course, the real championship contender, the one that was just their last year, is the Chiefs. They'll be right back in the conversation. I know this offseason they lost some pieces, but they did a fine job of, shoring up some of their issues. Offensively, I think their offensive line has some different variety, some different options. They could be a fun unit next year. So it's the Chiefs. You got Mahomes, you got Kelsey, you have Reed. They'll be championship contenders yet again. But at my number one, and I think I had them also ranked in my number one division last year too, so a repeat, it's the NFC North. Now, admittedly speaking, I don't feel terribly confident in the NFC North as I did last year, but I do think they'll still be incredible. For this division, I think there's 4 contenders. I think all of them will be pushing for playoff spots. The Chicago Bears last year would have been listed as a rebuilding team, maybe even a building team. And it kind of showed last year they had a lot of flaws, but I think ultimately they kind of were able to piece some things together late. And this offseason, they have went crazy. Detroit is Detroit. They were super banged up last year. I think if they were healthy, they maybe would have beat Washington. That being said, I'm not sure about that, but I think they would have. Green Bay has Jordan Love. I think they're actively trying to go for a championship, and same thing with Minnesota. They're probably the one team that I feel the least confident in, just because I haven't seen JJ McCarthy play an NFL snap quite yet. So I think there's some concern. With that said, there's 4 contenders, 2 playoffs, and 2 championships. The 2 playoff contenders for me are the Bears and the Vikings. The Bears are just a young team that don't really have continuity. Can't quite say that I trust Ben Johnson on a deep playoff run as a head coach because I haven't seen it yet. And for the Vikings, it's just that I haven't quite yet seen much from JJ McCarthy. With that said, the Vikings have one of the more complete rosters out there. So JJ should have a relatively easy time out there. It's just I want to see it come playoff time. The 2 championship contenders are the Lions and the Packers. The Lions. They're super talented. They have everything you could possibly ask for. My only concern for them is that I do kind of worry about their pass rush, but you lose both your coordinators. That sucks, but for the most part, pretty confident in Detroit. Green Bay, you could talk me into just being a playoff contender, but I do think they're ridiculously talented on both sides, and there's clearly something there that makes you feel confident with them. Like, I don't know. I just think that Green Bay is one of those teams that could go on a run, but if you want to talk me into just calling them playoff contenders, that's fine. With that said, the division's future is unbelievably bright. The Chicago Bears look like they could be an absolute threat for the foreseeable future. Detroit, same exact thing. Even Green Bay to some extent. Like, I feel great about their future, and definitely Minnesota. So all 4 of these teams' futures are unbelievably bright. It's going to be like Hunger Games these next 4, 5, 6 years, where these teams are just going to be picking each other apart. And honestly, it just kind of sucks that all 4 of these teams are peaking all at the same time. I guess it doesn't suck. That would make for some great football. But you guys let me know in the comment section below. Do you agree or disagree with my list? And let me know your list down below. And if you enjoy, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.